very carefully write what I have to say, and sometimes the written word is more effective in being able to explain things. But we're in a situation where we're talking about the spoken word, so it's quite different. So I can't cover everything. I have a ton of information to hand out, but so that's what's kind of important to me, to narrow down the field, just the key, like Kevin's already mentioned some of the key questions. And I also greatly thank Kevin for inviting me down to come, because I think he does a great job, very frankly, and he's teaching how his approach is very outstanding. So, I'm going to read a little bit, and many authors read some of this stuff. First, so to demonstrate my writing style. Secondly, I want to read the preface I've written in the first few pages of my introductory chapter. That gives you an idea of the situation. So this is a good way to get a lot of facts out to you, basic facts about my background and what's happening with me. And then we can then promptly get into focusing on white collar, because I am very much a white collar criminal. And I guess the key question you're going to ask right after all this is, well, what exactly did you do to get you in all this trouble? And why did you do it? Well, those are very difficult questions in themselves. So I'm going to sit down, if I may, and just spend a few minutes reading through this preface I have and my first opening chapter. Then we'll get down to the discussions. I'm not sitting in a hole here, okay. So there's a few pages of my preface. On a fateful morning in June 2011, in my apartment high above San Francisco, the FBI arrested me for financial fraud in losing over $9 million of my investors' funds. Many people thought, as I did, that I was a successful international lawyer, businessman, and pillar of my community. I was realizing my childhood dreams for doing big things in the wide, wide world. I appeared to be trustworthy, a good family man, superbly well educated and traveled, with connections worldwide. Little did we know all this would now be turned upside down. I had fully earned and deserved my 57 months federal prison sentence. I saw and lived the incredible reality of life on the inside for 32 months and survived. I served 7 years combined in several federal prisons, a halfway house in the Tenderloin, home confinement and detention, and supervised release. I returned to civil society a sober, wiser, chastened, and rehabilitated ex-con, now known more sweetly as the formerly incarcerated. To the amazement of my fellow inmates, I admitted my guilt and fully accepted and embraced my responsibilities. I paid my dues. I also acquired a unique perspective on the cold realities of prison life and how the American criminal justice system actually operates. Coupled with my Harvard Law School education and 35 years of practical legal experience as a practicing lawyer, I realized it can and should be changed. Hard, tough-minded, effective solutions are realistically possible. After I got out, my new cohorts, who understood and supported my thinking, said, I have important original ideas that need to be heard, even more so now that the political pendulum is swinging against criminal justice reform. I want this account to be clear, honest, concise, and rational, and to the point. While I do explain what happened to me and how I dealt with the reality of what I experienced and observed, my purpose is not to exalt, glamorize, or redeem myself. My goal is to spread the word about the objective facts of our much maligned system and how it can and must be changed dramatically, while at the same time enhancing effective law enforcement. I aim to educate, motivate, warn, and activate. This to me is not a partisan political issue, neither left nor right, but one that belongs to all political parties. By insisting on being honest and objective, my 12 years search for the truth about our sprawling and all-encompassing will distress and confuse some and confound many, hopefully enlighten and stimulate those, but at least lead to clearer thinking about especially about the changes that we are all seeking. I've got some editorial changes I've already made. I'm focused on the big changes now underway at San Quentin. You know about those, and San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, and what is actually happening and how that has stolen some of my thunder, but not all of it. I'm committed to using my first-hand insights and actual experience with the system to advocate for improving the lives and prospects of the 2 million presently incarcerated and another 2 million on probation or parole, and as well as to help see the prospects of the more than 20 million Americans who are formerly incarcerated, more than 20 million Americans, but still living in the shadows of our society. Nobody knows how they are dealing with the rest of their lives after prison, and few much care. Except my own experience leads me to care deeply. After reading this report, I hope you will too. So now I'm going to turn to the first chapter. And also, I failed to mention in my introductory remarks, I'd like you to help me with some editorial questions. I have a couple of issues of whether this should be a chapter in the book, or whether I should be talking about this. So any critique or information, comments you have about the writing style and all that, I'd appreciate that. So my introduction to the so-called American criminal justice system, federal style. Sudden heavy pounding on my front door interrupted my early morning reverie. 4 young FBI agents, 2 women and 2 men, pistols holstered and wearing the classic blue FBI jackets, barged in. I knew immediately the gig was up. Les jeux sont faits. It was Friday, June 20, 2011. I was in my 20th floor apartment overlooking the bay in the downtown San Francisco financial district. I had spent the previous evening drinking a bottle and a half of cheap New Zealand Chardonnay that I liked so much, and trading millions of dollars in financial futures contracts online through my interactive broker's account, employing the ridiculous leverage that it provided. Most people thought I had a smooth and successful time of it as an international business lawyer. A smug yet stimulating life, involving many activities that I would never admit to myself were outrageously wrong and foolish. I had plenty of money, several intimate women friends, and steady foreign travel abroad, and seemingly the respect and the friendship of hundreds of my peers in California and around the world. I was said to be a pillar of my community, and honest and trustworthy. At least I thought I was. The FBI squad thought otherwise. My double life and lives were about to change dramatically. The FBI was all over my case. The leader sat me down for a seemingly casual, friendly conversation. My name is Jeremy. I'm a special agent for the FBI investigating the financial crimes you are committing. We have overwhelming evidence. By the way, I'm also a graduate of Dartmouth, although many years after you. I want to talk with you about all you've been up to. At this point, I didn't feel like standing up to sing "Men of Dartmouth." That's a joke. He proceeded to ask several questions and ask assertions that I intentionally tried to defraud innocent investors, to which I took exception. Confronted by my fellow alumnus of my old Ivy League alma mater, and a fresh-faced young female FBI agent, whom I interpreted to be sympathetic, I managed to forget all of the savvy legal knowledge from my Harvard Law School education and 34 years of being a licensed lawyer. Don't talk to the police without first consulting a lawyer, and for God's sake, don't talk about your case. I feebly explained to him how I was working in many ways to pay back all the money I had, quote, borrowed from my investors. He did not like my answers, for which I cannot blame him, and said he'd had enough. Jeremy arrested me for financial fraud of over $10 million, by running what seemed to him like a Ponzi scheme to take money from innocent investors. Legally, it was called wire fraud and financial misrepresentation. The other two agents then handcuffed and hauled me out of my apartment, down the elevator, and through my front lobby, well occupied by the residents and staff, who wondered what this obvious perp walk was all about. We marched out to Battery Street, where I was placed into a car the agents had double parked. Off I went to the United States Courthouse building in the Civic Center of San Francisco, leaving behind Jeremy and the other female agent to search through every inch of my place. Of course, they had a search warrant. Sitting in the back seat, a flood of emotions rushed through my rattled brain, including what was now overwhelmingly obvious. The game was up. They had me, and all that remained was how much time I would serve. My rising sense of embarrassment and shame and humiliation, more for the impact this would have on my family, friends, and loved ones. My good reputation, which I previously zealously guarded, was now shot. I was being a total disgrace. We drove under the federal building and up the elevator to the 19th floor room and the holding area. Without even a fare thee well, the FBI squad put me in the hands of the United States Marshal Service. The booking process proceeded: fingerprinting, ID, shot calling. Oddly, I was smiling, which I managed to do in all my future in-custody photos. I changed clothes into jail guard, the federal orange. The two marshals marched me back into the small holding cells that are lined up in a row outside the courtroom area. The feds don't maintain any facilities here, so for prisoners to stay and live in, so they subcontract with the local police or sheriff's facilities. These cells are used to hold prisoners when they are first booked for trial or attending a court hearing, but not overnight. By the way, since I am providing hearing with no extra charge, a basic education in our country's incarceration system, it is useful for you to know that prisons are only state and federal. Jails are city and county. A nice distinction. Because my arrangement here will not be until tomorrow morning, there is no federal jail in San Francisco for me to spend the night. I'm now to be transferred across the San Francisco Bay to the notorious North County Alameda Jail in downtown Oakland, where the feds have kindly contracted for space with the Alameda County Sheriff. 7 other federal criminals are married from the holding cells. The two marshals go to back work to put on the leg and chains and shackles, connected to the handcuffs. I can barely move. We are shuffled out, down the elevator to the underground garage again, and into an old and battered passenger van. I'm crunched into the back seats with 7 other similarly constrained federal criminals without further introduction. These are the first federal prisoners that I've met. And henceforth they would never fail to ask me what my charges are and then explain what they were doing there themselves. 1 year later, as federal prison inmates, they would become my constant companions and best friends over the next 3 years. Oh, the thousands of times in my life I'd driven over the magnificent Bay Bridge, over the ever-beautiful San Francisco Bay, but never like this. My life was changing right before my eyes, and in real time, its new dimensions were unfolding. Soon I would have to stop worrying about what everybody else would think about me and come to grips with what I was thinking. Upon arriving in the underground bowels of the notorious Wiley E. Manuel Alameda County's courthouse and jail in Oakland and removing the chains again, I'm processed all over again. After all, I am now guest of the Alameda County Sheriff. In the underworld world of criminals across America, this place is notorious and feared as North County, home base in Oakland's seemingly intractable violent crime problems. Now the deputy sheriff dropped me off in a large holding cell. about the time with about 40 fellow criminals who are being charged with state crime mostly, with all kinds of other crimes except federal, except capital or violent offenses are housed separately. I quickly realized it was important for me to speak up clearly and honestly and hold my own openly with my fellow criminals. I act confident and friendly. Just a few hours before, I was blithely carrying on my life, never imagining that I would be sitting where I am. I would have known, should have known the reality of where I was headed, and that was all my own doing. While my mind was still abuzz, reality was dawning. Ultimately, I'm called out for transfer to my new cell. Along the way, I faced my first stripped-down naked search based on a lineup of about 10 naked prisoners, culminating in a requirement to bend over for a visual body cavity search. If you don't know what's going on here, you have a more sheltered life than even I had. This was an indication of the many indignities to come. Next, I enter a large structure or pod with 4 tiers of cells surrounding a large open atrium area. I am greeted by a huge Alameda County deputy sheriff in charge of this pod, who wore combat boots and clothes with a pronounced military style. He never used the mic and the speaker system, but announced in a commanding, booming voice that every inmate could not avoid hearing. Surprisingly, he had a big smile on his face. His first words were to me, "Hey, we got an OG." I asked what that meant, and he said, "Old guy," and pointed me in the right direction. I learned later that it also means original gangster. It's a term of art used in prison. I was nicknamed Triple OG. 50, 60, and 70 years old. That's why I was Triple OG. One of the many nicknames I had. I'm going to give you an idea of others. One was called the Scammer. Another was called the Shot Caller. And it was called Birdie. That other thing what Birdie made of. So I like this guy, the deputy sheriff with the loud voice, for what seemed to be his underlying warmth and clarity. This guy was commanding a very tight ship amidst a sea of anxiety, disarray, and confusion. Most of his guests, about 80 guests, were about to become hardened criminals who carefully followed his directions. I was struck by the loud noise coming from a TV set that filled the entire 4-story pod and seemed to be playing old movies at peak volume all day long. At my first meal in the chow hall, a sharp Vietnamese Californian steak convict with a deep voice was giving me the usual grilling about my crime. When he realized I was a federal defendant, he exclaimed, "Oh yeah, big shit." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed like I had made it to the criminal top, although not to be confused with all the real life bottom. Eventually, an orderly took me to the 3rd floor and placed me in a gloomy concrete cell. I was the sole occupant of the toilet, had no seat, double bunks, and a slatted window, narrow window, that looked out on a wall. There seemed to be no others on my floor, which reflected I would seem to be the only federal prisoner there. I decided to stay in my cell, which seemed to be unlocked, for the rest of the evening, avoiding the nightlife, you might say. I was left with my agonizing thoughts. How did I get here? What happened to me that I have hit this bottom? Why? How could I be so stupid? What's going to happen next? How can I survive this? I felt overwhelmed by shame, humiliation, anxiety, and disgust. I spent a restless night. I knew many more were to come. It took 1 more year until the long trail of my prosecution sent me into the federal prison for almost 3 more years. I fear what lay ahead. Okay, I want to skip over a little bit, it's gonna be, oh, so we went back to the San Francisco cells. I returned when I got back from Oakland. I had to go by the arraignment, so I went to the cell there. I was speedily reprocessed in San Francisco upon returning to my SF cell. I heard a developing commotion in the larger cell next to me, which contained several members of a notorious Asian street gang on trial right next door for gang murders, which I had read about in the local press. It came as a surprise to me when I later learned that I received more media coverage than they did. These dudes exuded hostility and anger, staring at me as they were marched past my cell to the courtroom. I realized it would be smart not to stare back at them or engage with them in any way. The more muscular marshal ribbed me that they were going to put me in with those guys, but figured maybe that was not the best idea. He proved to be in a bad mood that day, harassing and haranguing the inmates as they were taking them off the chains and shackles. I was there for the arraignment in the San Francisco federal courtroom. The federal public defender who had counseled me had been in touch with my sons. They were greatly concerned about me and very supportive. I was marched into this courtroom presided over by a female magistrate. I smiled wanly to my two sons and former wife sitting in the audience. My sense of shame rose up in my throat. For the first time, I saw my prosecutor, an assistant United States attorney, who was more aggressive and outspoken in this hearing than he was ever to be in the future. And of course, he's prosecuting me and talks about I was a white-collar criminal. He argued that there needed to be a big bail amount because I was flight risk, which I thought was absurd. He referred to the many millions involved in my case, the seriousness of my crime, my contacts all over the world, and argued that at least $10 million bail should be required. This was an early sign of how the FBI had oversized the value of my white-collar crime. But this never bothered me, as I came to realize I was equally just as guilty, regardless of how big the FBI thought my crime was. Okay, I'm stopping there. So, what do you all think about this from a writer's standpoint? If you have any comments?
It's good. It has good comedy and good information about your background.
Thank you. Thank you for noting that I try to inject a little humor in a tough situation. You gotta have a little touch of humor.
I like how you got straight to the point of what happened the day you got arrested, and the imagery you provided with the description of the color of the uniforms that they're wearing, because it was classic, the FBI.
Yeah.
I have a question though, if you can. How old were you exactly when you were arrested?
I was 74. I'm now 86. 86, pretty ancient, you know, not 1939. I'm still functioning all right, don't worry.
I'm good.
I run 2 miles once a week. I run 2 miles. I don't walk, I run. Any other questions about?
How was the food in federal prison?
I beg your pardon?
How was the food in federal prison?
How is the what?
The food.
Okay, yes, yeah, you get right to the point. That's good. Actually, the food is, I say, surprisingly good. Now, prisoners always complain. They never like anything. And the federal system is pretty well organized in some ways, managed. They have the Bureau of Prisons. The Bureau of Prisons is part of the Justice Department. They have people determining a menu of what should be served for the entire prison system. Like, you know, they got 50 prisons and locations around the country. They serve the same thing every day, same or everywhere. And so they have certain nutritional standards. So they, generally speaking, it's always always vegetables, some kind of meat or fish, or chicken, and always fruit is provided. So and a lot of people get quite fat in vegetarian because it's not as if they're getting fed enough. So but it's not fine dining by any standard. It's not, the culinary delights of San Francisco should not be compared, but I don't think it's a basis for a lot of complaints. Pretty good, and of course, they have one supervisor, federal employee, correctional officer, of dining hall, and then everything else is inmate run. Inmates run, they do everything, they do all the work. The top chef, I knew the chef quite well in some of my places I've been, and they're run by an inmate. Of course, the inmates get paid. The best sum of probably about $5 a day or something like that. So, I had a job too, by the way, so I've been off the subject. Go ahead.
Can you go into more detail about how you committed financial fraud?
Yes, okay, that's good. In fact, I'm gonna do that next. I was thinking your next question is gonna be, well, what did you do, and why did you do this, right? That's the two questions. So I'm gonna try to answer those in a very succinct manner in a minute. And I'm writing a book about it, so it's a long subject, but I'm going to try to boil it down to its essence. But I want to finish off now. If you got any other thoughts about, did you like my writing style? Was it all right?
Yeah.
You can follow that all right?
It really shows your personality, like
Pardon me?
it shows your personality, like you're so like a goofy person. Well, it's a serious topic because you did get arrested for it.
Yeah.
You're throwing stuff like the Dartmouth's joke, like because he went to Harvard and stuff like that. Like that just shows your personality, even though you were arrested.
Yeah, that's good of you to say that, because I'm trying to write a book that's somewhat entertaining, right? And you know, nowadays, everybody talks about reading books, and book reading is going down. Well, a lot of books are very boring, and they're not worth reading, right? I mean, that's why I hate to say that, but, so, I'm very sensitive to the idea that you gotta keep turning the page, and it's gotta make the writing vivid and lively, so that people will say, oh, well, what's it saying, what is it saying next? What's coming up next? Okay, so I turned it over to the two questions that the gentleman just started referring to, and then you can quiz me further about what kind of depth you want me to get into. What I did, in the end, bottom line is, I had developed an obsession. I had several obsessions. I had become an alcoholic was one. And number two, I had a pattern of what's called grandiosity, showing off, and how smart I was and all this and that. And three, very relevant here, is that had founded a company with two other partners, and other times I handled the financial aspects of the business as well as the legal aspects. So I was in charge of bank relations, and I did, because I founded a company in international trade. We had some large contracts, shipping industrial and agricultural chemicals and petrochemicals around the world. So these are big contracts, and sometimes it'd be extensive payment terms that go over the course of a year or something. So we had to hedge the exposure to foreign exchange or risk, interest rates changing. We had to take out futures or forward contracts to hedge the risk that the currency that we're dealing in, we're going to get paid in a year, say for example, wouldn't go down in value. In some circles, there's also futures contracts. You buy futures, same as a forward contract. Do many of you know much about, or do you have some idea about what this futures trading is? Does anybody? Okay, so this is, let me say, in the financial world, futures trading has become a pretty significant area of trade where for financial management, just as I was saying, to hedge exposure, to reduce risks of fluctuations in currencies, which go up and down all over the place, and interest rates fluctuate. A lot of big companies or companies engage exposed to this kind of risk, take out these contracts. So I managed doing that. It was a perfectly legitimate thing for me to be doing.
Bob,
Yeah.
can you explain what a hedge is?
A hedge is when you take out a contract that will pay you difference between what you thought you were gonna get or would normally get and what you end up receiving. That is, if a currency goes down in value, you're getting less money for what than you started out with. So the hedge is a contract, you pay for it, and it covers the risk of that drop in value, or if your expense that goes up, and that they would reimburse the expense.
It's like insurance.
Pardon me?
It's like insurance, right?
In a form of insurance, exactly. So that might be a almost simpler way of saying, yeah, it is a financial insurance tool for fluctuating values of money. And long and short, concise definition. But there's a huge futures market that has now developed out of this, serving the purpose of the agricultural, the famous pork bellies, or wheat, or soybeans, and all kinds of other products that go up and down. Obviously, people in and out of those businesses want to hedge against fluctuations or changes in the value of their products. So they take out futures contracts. And it's a highly leveraged contract, meaning you can buy, say, $1 million worth of currency at a substantial discount than what you pay, and you wouldn't have to put up collateral to back. You can put up small collateral, small amount of money allows you the leverage of being able to cover this risk and carry out that financial transaction 6 months or a year from now through the hedge. Now, it's a Chicago Board of Trade trading market, and a lot of people do this for their business, but a lot of people do it for speculation. It's a form of gambling. You know, they don't know, nobody admits that, nobody says that, but it's a form of it. And because you can make tons of money. And there's some very prominent people in the world today who have made a lot of money trading, and they, like the owner of the Boston Red Sox, he's a famous hedge fund manager, mainly traded in options. These hedge funds, a lot of what they do is investing in the futures markets. The hedge funds, one of the tricks is to hedge exposure to risk, so they can take higher risk, and also they can make more money. They make more money, they take more risk, but you also might lose. So how do you guard against losing? You got these hedge, you take out these futures contracts, perfectly legitimate. But there's all kinds of other people who speculate that I'll take you by this, I'm gonna bet that the yen is gonna drop by X, Y, Z, and the next 6 months, and I'm gonna take out, I'm gonna sell the yen now at a high price and buy it back later at a low price.
So how did this, Bob, so how did all of this tie into your crime?
Because I developed the habit of trading. I developed the habit of speculating in the market. I said, oh, you know, I'm a smart guy. This is a little bit the way I thought. This is the way a white-collar type of criminal begins to think. I know a lot of stuff. In fact, I know better than those other guys. I know just as much as some. I can give you a simple example. George Soros, the famous guy. He ran a massive trading account, massive fund, mainly in futures contracts, financial futures contracts. He was famous for making $1 billion in one major trade against the British pound when the euro came in. So I began trading, thinking, you know, I'm smart enough, I can do this. I know how the market works. I'm a lawyer. I understand the technicalities, and I can also figure out the mechanics. And I'm going to start trading in these futures contracts. So the T-bond, Treasury bond futures. That's another great one to trade in. So I became attracted to that because I thought, you know, I'll make money. Sideline hobby. And that evolved into a daily habit of mine. Daily, I would almost every day make a trade of some kind. And I pretty well did what most amateur traders end up doing. They lose money. They don't make money because they're a bunch of amateurs, or they don't have the talent that it takes. And it takes real talent and maybe luck. And there are very few people who are really successful. Some are wildly successful. Anyway, I wasn't. Well, how this fits in, Matt, this is my good friend, Matt Reese, is an advisor helping me in writing my book and trying to get me going to finish the thing. So he's a good friend and he's invited me. And his great background experience. So, and so I would take my, so what happened was I had a group of lady friends, after I separated from my wife, I got fixing after women is another activity I engaged in.
Oh, yeah.
Excuse me, that activity, shameful. And so I had two women friends with a nice chunk of money. And I would always tell them how I was a smart investor and I could do this, do that, do that. Well, okay, if you're so smart, why don't you invest, why don't you take care of some of our money? Why don't you make money for us? If you're making it for yourself, making so much money, then why don't you take it, why don't you we'll do it together. We'll put the money with you and you can manage it and then we share the profit. Okay, well, this sounds like a good idea. They appreciated how I was such a brilliant trader because I told them so. I didn't tell them that you usually lost money, but that's where you begin, things start going wrong at the beginning. So we decided to form a fund that would take in investors, mainly of our friends and associates, the people we knew, and we would start trading and making money, and I would then share the profit with all these nice investors. And they put in about $1 million, started off rather nicely, and they also invited other people to join and introduced me to other people. All of them being women who were not knowledgeable in finance and other people who were not too knowledgeable, because I wouldn't want somebody too smart to get in. But because basically I was taking in all the money that I got, and in the end I got over $10 million from various investors. And they're all like people lived in Lafayette in the community area, friends of friends of friends. And basically I lost all of it. Because I was not a successful trader. But at this point it became an addiction. And it's one thing that Judge Breyer, Charles Breyer, my judge, did say about me, that I wasn't greedy for money. I actually had enough money. I was a lawyer and doing well as a lawyer. And so I was able to function. And I was not doing it for money, because I never took the money and bought fancy cars, or a new house, I never did anything like that. What I did was always took that money and put it into my trading account. He saw that as evidence that I was not greedy for money or would go and spend the money on other things. I only, and all of it, went into the trading account. The problem was that I would, over a period of time, it takes me a while to lose money. You know, you gotta work at it. Eventually you lose. So I had become addicted. And what started out as a business task became an obsession with me. And why did I have such an obsession? You say, why? Because of my background growing up in a small town where my father was well educated, but he had a heart ailment, and he had to have open heart surgery. 1954 at the University of Pennsylvania Medical Hospital, one of the earliest open heart surgery in the history in the world. And he was unable to work, became very reserved, and kind of lost a lot of his vitality and all that. And so we had no money. I grew up very poor, even though I was from an old family. We never had a lot of money to start with, but I was an old family, an upstanding citizen in my little town in Pennsylvania. But I grew up not having any money. That was a plague for me. It was a plague. I ended up having to go finance my entire education and everything I did. It's all on money that I earned myself. And then I was alienated from the small little town in Pennsylvania that I grew up in, the rural community, insular. I was kind of like an arrogant kid anyway, because you could see I know all the answers, blah, 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 all this. The long and short was that I was alienated, I became driven to succeed. I believed I had high expectations, high ambitions, great ambitions. I wanted to do well in the world. And so all these things, and then this pressure for me to succeed, do well, to show these people that I can do this. Money was a measure of my success. It wasn't anything I needed or wanted. I wouldn't do anything with it. If I got a lot of money, I never did much of it anyway. Except reinvest it, and eventually you manage to lose it. So This is an addiction, a problem, because it kind of underlied all the losses I was taking, compelled me to continue with this trading, instead of stopping and saying, you gotta stop this and get out of it. Because didn't I know better? I'm a Harvard lawyer, don't I know anything about ethics? Don't I know I'm violating the law, I'm taking people's money on false pretenses? I'm never telling anybody. I would, every month, I would send a report to my investors, like 20 or 30 nice people, most of professional people or women in business who had money, and reporting how you've gained 15.78% and your account is now has this value. So I add that money up each month, and added up each month. I said, "Right, you did so well this month." You know, it's almost hard for you to believe that I would just send out some blatant lies, just plain lies.
Player Ponzi scheme.
Well, that's what they say, Ponzi scheme. The Ponzi scheme here, that's why I mentioned Ponzi, and I've been talking earlier about Charles Ponzi, famous guy, is a scheme where you're taking somebody's money, you're gonna invest it, but then you go out and lose it. So you gotta cover that person still wants his money back, or wants to be paid or something, and now you're out of money, so you've gotta find another sucker to pay. You gotta take in more investment. So you're constantly having to bring in new investors to make up for the losses that you've already sustained, because you never want to admit that you have lost money or because you go out of business. I would never admit that I was losing this money so stupidly. I'd lose face so much. I couldn't admit to my family. I could never admit to anybody else. This was overwhelming over the arrogant ideas and images I had about myself would not allow me to confess the failure, confess to anybody, any of my sons or others. I mean, I needed help. I couldn't get help. I had no way I was gonna have, I had lawyer friends, and I remember lawyer friends sometimes joking, what are you doing about this, and this. I couldn't tell these guys, who were friends of mine, tough guys too, tough lawyers. They would say, what the hell are you doing, Tunnell? Why are you doing this? You better stop this. I would never tell them about that. Why? I didn't want them to tell me that. I was in denial. Was I doing something wrong? I should have known that, but I never admitted that.
When you were trading, like what type of time frame did you use?
Almost overnight. I was supposed to be a day trader.
Day trader.
A day trader. But sometimes it'll go on 2 days. Sometimes, but you place an order worth maybe $1 million. Also, one thing I did was I took up my alcoholism then came to the fore that I used to. I was separated from my wife, and I didn't have any live-in companions or anything. So in the evening, I drink about a bottle and a quarter of white wine, and I've then worked my futures trading account, fairly sophisticated account with interactive brokers. You can look up interactive brokers online. It's the best in the business, yes.
So how long were you like doing this trading and the investment things before you were like caught by the FBI?
25 years. 25 years, say from 1912, the whole thing blew up. Why? Because my whole scheme blew up mainly because this happened to women's friends. I was kind of getting tired of her, she was getting tired of me, and so then I was investing her money, and I was making all this money, but I was trying to basically pay her off. So it was a little bit hard to pay somebody off if you lose the money, but I was making progress paying her down, but she told her sons about this, and then the sons went to the FBI, and then the FBI got wind of this. Now, the FBI was embarking at that time on a mission to go after white-collar criminals. So now I'm getting back to my point of the class, right? That I was a classic white-collar criminal. And I think I have showed some of the characteristics of the white-collar criminals of being pretentious. They operate by entitlement, they know better than others. And overly aggressive, yes.
Would you say your alcoholism influenced you to do these actions?
I didn't hear you exactly.
Would you say your alcoholism influenced you to act the way you acted, or do trading and commit fraud?
I'm sorry, I'm not.
So did your alcoholism influence
Yes.
your behavior?
Okay, now, that's a very good, excellent question, and, I would trade at night on this interactive broker's account, online, in my own office, our home office. Boom, 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 I could type in the trade, I could make $1 million trading transactions. That's the whole total value. I might have been collateral of $150,000. I can leverage that to do $1 million trade, and I can put the trade on, like buy, if the market moves such a treasury bond, futures, currency oftentimes, but the treasury bonds and some other product things too. And the stock indexes, you can do the stock, trade the stock, best way to trade the stock market. Sorry, I say best, that's a bad joke. See. I also get excited about talking about it. It's one of my psychologists in prison, I had a psychologist program that a number of times I come, I went to cognitive behavioral therapy. You might need to talk about that in the next segment here. So, anyway.
But Bob, yeah, but just, I mean, what you would, so I visited Mr. Tunnell when he was in prison in Lompoc, and one of the first things you said to me is that you were basically, you were drinking, as you were saying, and it was late at night, and it was clouding your judgment. He was making a lot of bad decisions both on what to trade and the actual trading itself, and the alcoholism fed into that directly, right?
Thank you, Matt. Very
Yeah.
good. You got me right on focus. You got me back on the focus here. One of my counselors in the prison program I took for addiction, drug addiction, did say, emphasize the point that the alcohol had the influence in preventing me from understanding what I was doing wrong, or allowed me to be in denial. It gave me permission.
Mhm.
The key was permission. I had permission to be dishonest. It's okay, I can do that because I'm gonna make this money back just the way I lost it. By
Yeah.
trading.
Yeah.
Perfectly logical idea, right? No, it's not logical, but that, in my mind, it was. So, yes, I did drank a bottle and a quarter of wine, and did this trading, which again was a short-term types of trade where you had to decide, is this the risk worth taking, and can you properly hedge that risk? There's very sophisticated ways you can buy a call or special contracts that you can make that will cover the loss or prevent a buyer's closeout. So you hedge against the risk, right? Hedging against risk. That's why you could do that. But sometimes you drink too much and all that, you ignore that kind of stuff. So now, this does not excuse my crime. This alcoholism is never an excuse for criminal activity. And there are lots of people going to say a big story about alcohol. That's not a good excuse because it's a choice to make. You make a choice to abuse alcohol. It's part of the system. So you have to take the responsibility. The key with me is that the great key that I emphasize, I'd like to just get this out very clearly in the beginning, is I learned to accept my responsibility. That I should be accountable. That I'm the one who's guilty. I am totally guilty. And when I went to prison, people used to be astounded that I would admit to my guilt. Because nobody in prison, people in prison, inmates don't admit they're guilty. That's another characteristic. And no white-collar criminal is ever guilty of anything, right? You didn't think so. What I'm doing is just what everybody else does. This is part of business tactic. These things you have to do to make money. So, have I covered most of these points? This is the issue of why, what I did. I lost this money consistently and steadily, and I could have kept with this scheme I have. They call it a Ponzi scheme. But what's different is I didn't do this on purpose. And original Ponzi, that was his scheme. They always come bringing new people all the time. I did this because I was fixated on this trading. I got the money. I would always, my personal money. I had pretty good income as a lawyer. A lot of my money went in. I lost my own money as well as another $10 million on top of what other people lost. So this continued. Yes.
Do you have to pay restitution now to the victims?
Well, now here's another subject I'm going to mention. As A significant salient fact is that after my arrest, one of my sons has done very well in private equity. And he basically he's a very leading person in private equity, so he's done very well financially. Offered to and look into paying off all my investors. Some of whom were family members, some of whom he knew these investors, so he knew some of the people that looked. And he knew something about my past as a trading because I had some kind of problem developed in the 1990s, early, like 10 to 15 years before I was arrested. I had a little problem, something went wrong, and it came out that I had been doing futures trading. And I promised my son David that I would never do that again. Okay? And so part of my sort of situation was that I felt locked in. I felt I couldn't admit this to David. I couldn't admit this to anybody that I was doing this, even though, and so in order to bring it to an end. That's why I was basically forced to. And then the result of all this, after I got arrested, was that David felt compelled and willing to reimburse for all my investments. And he did. And you say, wow, because that's what Judge Breyer said. He's a very experienced leading senior judge in San Francisco, my judge, knew my case thoroughly. He said this was an outstanding thing that he did. He's never heard this done before. Never has this happened, that to his knowledge, in all of American history, legal history, where somehow the perpetrator or his family paid off all the debts on the result of this. And he says this is absolutely astounding. But he made very clear that that was not to influence the process of justice, that I was still guilty and I had to pay the price for that. And he made that very clear, my own word, very, very clear to me. In fact, he said he couldn't even make it worse because everybody's going to be very sensitive not to give me special treatment or treat me differently because somebody had a rich son who could pay off all the debts. By the way, point number 2 is I'm going to ask you now, I'd like to have your opinion. I used to, when I gave talks, mention this fact about my son paying off the debtors, all my investors, earlier in my talk. And somebody was very smart about it, about writing books, and they said, don't do that. Don't say that early, because people will change their attitude towards you. Because, that's why you got off, blah, blah, all this. Whereas I got a pretty severe sentence in the end, but 57 months, that's a long time.
But you got let out early, right? 32 months you got let out?
Pardon me?
You were supposed to serve 57 months, but you got let out early, right? 32 months?
Yes, because I got 1 whole year off for taking the RDAP.
What's that?
It's a drug treatment program, experimental drug treatment started by the Bureau of Prisons in Washington to treat underlying addictions of the inmates coming in, especially drugs, mainly drugs. And of course, I didn't take any narcotic drugs. I'm not a druggie, but I'm an alcoholic, and I was. And so I took this 1-year residential program, and you took every day of the week. You lived in a separate dormitory, special place, had 150 people in the program at a time. It was specialized using CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Who knows about CBT here? Somebody else knows about it. Something. Okay. CBT is a great idea in psychology. I believe it is. I'm a great believer in it. I spent a whole year learning that program, working it. A simple essence of it is that your thoughts govern your behavior. So if you change your thoughts, you can change your behavior. So you got to learn to change the basis of your thoughts. If you're misconstrued or got the thoughts wrong. It's a very powerful tool, often used in psychology today. It's commonly used. I believe it's about the only good thing that psychology has actually done in the last century. Only good thing, I'd say, frankly. And that's just my opinion on that. But, and I some, that more prisoners should get this kind of program, because it's perfect for criminals. They are committing illegal acts, and why are they doing this? Because their thoughts are misguided, right?
So I've heard, I know a lot of people that work for the Alameda Sheriff's County Office.
U.S. attorney, no, I don't be a public attorney, no.
Just like in general, like the prison as well, like I've heard a lot of things about it.
In Dublin?
Yes, in Dublin.
Yeah. Yeah, read it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to know, like, do you have any, like, I don't know if this is too personal, but any like post-traumatic stress from like, you know, being in prison, because that can be like life-altering experience.
By the way, nothing's too personal for me, you can ask anything, okay? It was a trauma to go in prison, and some people might suggest I have atrial fibrillation, might have been caused by that, some kind of traumatic event can cause that, but otherwise,
Which is a heart issue.
heart fibrillation, yeah. But I survived that, I survived that quite well. But, I went to minimum security prison. Now, that's a special kind of place. It's called a camp in federal. States have what's called farms, but they're not the same. This is the lowest limited security. There are no fences. There are no fences around our camp. And you only have about 150 people at most in the camp. It's usually that's close to a larger penitentiary where these inmates in the camp do specialized services supporting the guards and the management of bigger prison. But so again, there are no fences. So they have limited security, less stress, more flexibility, freedom. You don't have to wear a prison garb. You get, for the commissary, you can wear exercise clothes, all that. This is an after effect of these camps. Used to be plush, white-collar places. All the white-collar people went to those, and now there's not that many white-collar members. There may be 25% are white-collar. But the rest are drug dealers and other things. You have to have less than 10 years on your sentence. Be non-violent. You cannot be violent. And no sex offenders or child molesters, called chomos in prison jargon. None of that. So it's a lower stress environment. And I'm going to tell you very bluntly that prison in the end turned out to be a very positive experience for me. I found it very interesting. I used to go, I was very well known in prison, and I used to talk to people, very friendly to all inmates. I was always welcome to talk to any inmate. Some of them, of course, some were hostile to me as a privileged white-collar hotshot guy. They thought I was the man. I symbolized the man. It was impressing them. But others are not. Most people are very friendly. Most people talk about things. I talk to them all the time with prisoners about their situation. And one of the most important things that I found and concluded was that everybody claimed they're innocent. But then I'd come and say, well, I was pretty guilty. I'm responsible. Yeah, right.
Since you said you went to Harvard Law, did you ever help like any other inmates in there? Like, did they ever ask for like legal help?
Yes, many came to me for legal help. Said, you know, I'm innocent. Tell me how you can help me. My lawyer did a lousy job, you know. And the public defenders weren't worth anything. And here, I'll tell you about my case. So they tell me about a case. So my usual style, I started picking it apart, what he's saying, ask the question about this, question about that. I never found anybody that I thought was innocent. Not one. You know, forgive me on this one. And I talked to a lot of people.
So for you, like, you've been very transparent about your experience and you seem very accountable and like cognizant of how you went wrong. My question was, did you ever meet other like white-collar criminals that weren't as like accountable as you? And what was like the main difference between you guys?
Yeah, other white-collar criminals were arrogant. They thought they were entitled to do whatever, it's called entitlement. They do whatever they want to do and can do. And what I was doing out there, this just standard industry stuff. I never should have been convicted. I'm absolutely innocent. I got most expensive, best world lawyer in San Francisco. I knew some of these guys. And working on my case, which, by the way, sideline, if he's such a hotshot, great lawyer, I know I'm talking to him inside prison, right? He didn't do what he could, so, moral of the story. And so, and a lot of these guys were acting like assholes, so you guys forgive me for saying that, and I don't normally say anything, but that's the only way to describe them. And they were show-offs. They had a lot of qualities that I used to have. I used to have those things, I have to admit. And so I used to get, sometimes we have little arguments with these guys because he irritated me. And, you know, because I would tell them, I'm guilty. I knew I did wrong and I should have known. I should have known better. Of course I should. I should be even more guilty because I had a great education, certainly the opportunity to do the right thing, and I didn't do it. And I let an awful lot of people down. People who supported me. Remember, I had no money, so I didn't get money. People had to support me and help me. And I let them all down. So, yeah.
Kind of like going back to the beginning, did you like plead guilty or did you take like a?
Yes, I plead guilty, yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's right, made it very easy prosecution. Then we immediately go to the plea bargaining process. I already told you about the plea bargaining, didn't I? I told a lot of the story about how I think it's a good process and that.
No, but we're kind of running out of time, unfortunately, but if you go through it quickly, go ahead.
Kevin and I have already discussed this, like, we have a small difference, but maybe not big a difference. Long and short, okay. So I have about many more things I'd like to talk to you about. But my biggest, I didn't even get to my list of 10 things I want to change in the system. I'm working now to get this bloody book written. It's my statement of what should be changed about the criminal justice system. And it's very important that we have a solid, good criminal justice system. This represents America. It represents your country. And you tell a lot about a country by its criminal justice system. It's how the government, the power and might of the sovereign, deals with the ordinary citizen. How does it communicate its values and standards? So by the law, by enforcing the law. So having an effective system is very important. I'm working now to get the book finished, and then I'm also working, I met with the dean of the Harvard Law School about 2 weeks ago at a very wonderful session with my son David about setting up a program, a special professorship there on the subject of criminal justice, and develop some of these same themes that work out the inconsistency. We have myths, we're over-incarcerating people. Well, we're not over-incarcerating the white-collar criminals. We need to throw a lot of these guys in jail. The only thing to solve the white-collar crime problem, which is very, very serious. I think it's getting worse, much worse. Look around us. We got dishonesty, corruption's going on all over the place. That's what white-collar criminals are running amok. And in the next couple of years, they're going to continue this because the Justice Department's not enforcing the law. It's a very bad situation, and it needs to be changed. And we need to make major changes to bring about these changes. And I'm working to do that. That's going to be my atonement. Redemption is to make some progress doing that, and helping also the 25 million people who are formerly incarcerated. Think of that, 25 million people are out there, like 1 in 10 or 1 in 11 adult males in California is formerly incarcerated. Think of that, it's a very startling statistic. Can that be true? I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, I better stop here.